Welcome to the Tens of Industry Show. With me today, by far, one of my favorite guests. If you're looking for hype, for any fear-mongering, gloom and doom, 2008 repeats, this is the wrong interview for you. Andrew ZATLIN is a guy that looks at facts. He makes global, logical, and conclusive deductions. He really is in the business of selling his brain to hedge funds and institutional investors. I love interviewing him, and I've been saving all my best questions for this session with him. Andrew, moneyballeconomics.com. Thank you for joining us back.
Lior, thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm very well, and I want to start off with the obvious question: what's going on with coronavirus? Do you give me your entire thoughts process on this virus, just from A to Z?
And let me think this through a little bit. So if I come off a little bit not specific, but kind of free-ranging, bear with me. So first of all, we've got another SARS epidemic, more or less. The problem that we have, though, is facts. We really don't have a lot of good facts. China has not been transparent. And I think what you're going to find out is it a pandemic? Is it an epidemic? Call it what you will. We've got a problem. And we don't know exactly what's going on with this virus, but we can see already how it's affecting the global economy. Right now, you're going to start to see inventory problems as companies over the next few weeks start to realize, shipments from China to the US are slowing down, to Europe are slowing down. So as inventory gets basically sucked up, we're going to start to see some real impact in the supply chain, a lot of constraint. So what's going to happen out of that? Short term, you're probably going to see some inflation because inventory is just not available. That's a problem because we're already heading towards a supply constrained environment. Manufacturers have already been trying to, in the face of the trade war, kind of restrain production. So you've got restrained production, capacity utilization, very low. Now we've got to restart those factories. And that's what's interesting is if you're a US producer, there's kind of an interesting tug of war right now. On the one hand, you want to make your stuff, but you can't get supply. On the other hand, demand for your stuff may not be there. For example, if you look at smartphones, the Chinese are not going out and buying, they're staying home. So on the one hand, you've got shrinking demand, and then you've got shrinking supply. I think a lot of this hasn't really worked its way through, but if I were to kind of put my bets down, I would say this is inflationary because, again, no matter what, supply is dropping. I think there's going to be a huge shift, though. I think as we look at this in the short term inflationary, longer term structurally, I think a lot of companies are starting to realize placing all your bets on China as both a place to sell your goods, but also more critically to source your goods. That's a huge mistake. So global supply chain, I think this is a tipping point for China. I think companies are going to leave China more than come back. So that means onshoring into the US. If you want steel, do you buy cheap Chinese steel? Well, it's no longer cheap. The cost of doing business with China is now higher than ever. And so you start sourcing domestically. So I think from a US investor's perspective, this is a big positive. It's a big plus overall. I think that's a structural change. I think that is something that's going to continue to build more and more as we start to see companies start to rethink doing business with China. Another factor to consider is this is a huge problem for China. They're not making a lot of products right now. They're in a very precarious place. And they have a lot of debt that's coming due. So you now have to wonder what the Chinese government response is going to be. You've got a Chinese government that has not been honest and upfront, that is clearly trying to maintain control over media and prevent any kind of panic. It's not working. I mean, at the end of the day, we know that China's got a lot of problems right now economically. And now we've got the coronavirus coming in, and that's a real cold shower. China is a major source of demand for the world. So if they're slowing down, that's just going to pull the rest of the world down. So there's a lot of things that are moving here. But I think what China's going to do is they're going to just create a lot of liquidity. They've got to prevent companies from going under. This creates a great excuse for China. They were facing a lot of debt problems with small businesses and medium-sized businesses already. Their economy has really been contracting pretty sharply in the U.S.-China trade war. So they've had these problems. Now they've got an excuse to go out and help these companies stay, alive a little bit longer. The rest of the world will benefit from that. China throwing liquidity into the market, that always tends to elevate stocks and everything else. But I think longer term, China's in a bad place. And the coronavirus, I think, isn't played out. I think, in fact, we're going to see a second and third wave. The first wave is, what happened in China and then its immediate neighbors. The second wave is now it's out. It's in Iran. It's in Italy. It's got the second wave now where it's going to travel even further. And that's the pandemic that everyone's concerned with that leads to less travel. I unfortunately own Disney stock, and I wish I'd gotten out last week because I guarantee you they're going to see 1 million fewer visitors to Disneyland, Disney World this year. I know people are basically saying, I'm not going to Europe. I'm not going to Asia. I just don't want to do that. I know conferences that are being canceled. It's a pretty bad problem for the tourism industry, but people will spend that money somewhere. So I'm trying to figure out where the money's going to be spent, not just where it isn't going to be spent. Coronavirus is really an interesting thing because we're coming into a time and place in the global economy where we kind of reach peak manufacturing, peak auto demand. Then people aren't going out and buying. So I think if I were to kind of take all these thoughts and distill it down, I think, number one, structurally long-term, this is a big problem for China. It's an opportunity in the supply chain for more onshoring of manufacturing into the U.S. I would also say that you've got a lot of demand that's going to be pent up. So as we get to the second half, during an election cycle, you're going to see the economy zoom up. And I think that's going to be interesting for the election cycle especially. The second half is when I would expect there to be a lot of the fear of the coronavirus, a lot of the impact of the coronavirus starts to die down by the summertime. And then whatever was happening, the pent up demand comes online by, say, August and September.
That's very interesting. And something that many people do not know, for example, China makes 80% of the world's air conditioning. Air conditioners. They make 58% of the world's shoes. It's a huge import and export economy. 85% of businesses in China say they will run out of cash in the next 3 months. So these are big numbers, and the amount of middlemen that have to do with global supply chains are huge, and that's what I think you're alluding to, that companies and governments will start putting on some either regulatory or lawful or just free enterprise conclusions that, hey, we can't just have everything there. And I bet there are some champagne corks getting open in Turkey today and all these other manufacturing hubs that were not impacted by coronavirus. Yeah. Let me ask you about zero and negative interest rates. Becky Griffin just did a 2-hour show with Warren Buffett on Squawk Box. She asked him about low interest rates and negative interest rates and zero interest rates. And he was comparing the price of bonds with the price of stocks. And he said, never in my career have stocks been so cheap relative to bonds, not relative to themselves, obviously. He is alluding to a very expensive stock market, which is why he's holding a lot of cash, but compared to bonds. And I want to ask you, as an investor that also deals with institutions and large companies, why are investors buying negative yield bonds, and why are they buying zero yield bonds? What's the rationale behind this?
They have no choice. The stock market is small compared to the bond market. And so you have all this money flowing into bonds, fixed income, you have central bank notes. Someone has to buy and trade. And so given that, you have no choice. There's also regulatory requirements. You have to, some countries force investing into bonds. X% of the sovereign wealth portfolio has to be in bonds. They may not direct which bonds, some of them do, but fundamentally, there's going to be a huger market for bonds. I mean, you and I would probably both agree. Would you buy something that might move 2 or 3% a year versus the stock market where, historically you're getting, or at least historically being the last 10 years, you're getting a better return? Why would you do that? And so, it's what your risk appetite is. Pension funds need to have some kind of guaranteed return. So they're going to mix it up. Would you buy 0%? Well, if that's the only thing on the table, that's the only thing on the table. We're going into some real uncharted waters. we thought, what, in 2009 when the Fed started QE, we were in uncharted waters. We're in serious uncharted waters. It's like a race to the bottom where 0%, negative interest rates, whatever you can do to get your money out of cash and into some kind of productive place is the mandate that's being followed. I don't know that that's necessarily going to work. Would you and I, for example, 10 years ago when we had all these various tools that were being leveraged, where your mortgage rate at the time might have been, say, 6%, and all of a sudden comes down to 3%. That's significant. Now you're talking about, your mortgage rate goes from 3 to 2%. Is that really going to make people run out? Some people. But I think we're now at the point of diminishing returns where interest rates are no longer really going to generate any kind of solid economic value. It's pushing string uphill. There's just nothing there anymore. But you still got to do it because it's race to the bottom. Other places are doing it. I think you'll see an argument. Kashkari made the argument recently. Kashkari, the Fed. Why not do 0% kind of a thing? Why should we keep it up? Especially because, let's face it, this coronavirus is huge. The impact is going to be severe. We're not seeing it yet, but you're going to see it. And these talking heads and Fed governors are trying to get ahead of the curve and recognize that if we don't counter the impact of trade suddenly slowing down or stopping or reversing, we're going to see an outright recession. So how do we prevent that? And throw some money back into people's pockets. It's kind of like George W. Bush giving you $400 back, just because. Just go out and spend it. Keep the economy ticking over. But negative interest rates in America would just be, we know how that's going to be used. People will just get over leveraged and they'll bid up the stock market. They'll bid up any asset they can get. When you look at what's happening today with cheap interest rates in America, and I can only speak to America, but look at what happened. Really basic. All of a sudden, housing shot up. They re-stimulated the housing price, but it's gone too far. And so what's happening today are two trends. One, for the longest period in time, more personal income is being spent on cost of housing, and it's unsustainable. But hey, when interest rates are low and mortgage prices are low, you go out and you bid up the cost of housing. And so the second thing is you're seeing a shift in U.S. demographics. I think one of the outcomes of the census that's coming out at the end of the year will show there's been more people leaving major metro areas, going to smaller cities, because the cost of living is just too high. Why is the cost of living high? Because housing went up. Why did housing go up? Because the Fed dropped interest rates so that they could re-stimulate housing. And so you're now looking at a permanent change to the fabric of America simply because we bombed interest rates. These are kind of like longer term trends, but all of a sudden, I live in San Francisco Bay Area, hugely expensive place to be. The incomes here are high, but the cost of living is atrocious. And so you have a lot of people, I think there was every year there's a study, more people want to leave the Bay Area than come here because it's just too damn high. If you now bomb interest rates even further, well, that's just going to create a new bidding war on housing again. It's going to be interesting to see what the knock-on effects will be, because you do have people in the Bay Area collecting a Bay Area salary and then moving out, going to Colorado, Denver, going to Charlotte, but keeping that Bay Area salary. So now they can move to a Portland or wherever and bid up the housing. And it's just really interesting to see how a demographic change is inevitable. And that's actually kind of, I don't know if it's positive or not. I don't think it actually, it's inflationary. Bidding up housing is inflationary, but I don't see the economic advantage of lower interest rates from a long-term sustainable perspective. It's not creating more factories here. It's enabling, renovation of housing. That's all it's doing. We now have a huge boom in companies that build and outfit houses. We have TV shows dedicated to, buying a house, fixing it up. Okay. I'm not sure that's a long-term economic sustainable model.
Andrew, one thing I wanted to say was the one thing that's good about the virus being in China is that, once this is over, they'll run those factories 24/7. They'll not care about workers' rights or anything like that. So that's one thing that's actually worth thinking about, that their production man, they're going to go from 0 to 100 like you've never seen once this thing is contained.
Oh, talk about the second half pent up demand. I mean, this is where it's huge. Okay, short term coronavirus, people don't know what's really going on. Is this just a little bit more severe flu? We don't know, and China has not been helpful. So people get risk averse. They're going to stay home. Shipping, a stewardess gets, a flight attendant gets the coronavirus, and boom, she flies a couple places. Now she's infected a few more people. Okay, I've been on airplanes and caught the cold, so I don't know if that's similar or not. And that lack of information is going to make me be a little bit more cautious about travel, a little bit more cautious about going out. You look at China, auto sales, smartphone sales, just crashing in the past month because of this virus. Okay. But you fast forward a little bit, equipment breaks down. We think of smartphones as, I've got this phone and it's fine, I don't need to buy it, and that's okay. But equipment, cars, things that actually operate break down, you've got to replace it. And if you're not going out and buying that car, you're going to. It's not a luxury good. And what's going to happen is at some point in time when this virus, I think it's going to linger into the summertime. Let's say I'm right. Let's go really, you're going to have multiple waves where it erupts again. And, all of a sudden Iran has infected the Middle East. And that then happens. And then those folks then reinfect or infect other places. Whatever the case, you're going to have this huge pent up demand as stuff breaks down. And people will start to go out and buy, factories will come online. You're just going to see this huge surge. Right now, though, it's going to be interesting. Some places will be inflationary, some places deflationary. It'll be interesting.
Andrew, let's talk about the alpha dog president that we have. Alpha male, sorry, not alpha dog. The alpha male president we have. Is he really an alpha for the economy? In other words, will everything is everything that he's advocating as his personal achievements or his administration achievements, such as record amount of 401ks in our IRAs at $1 million valuations, trade deals, low unemployment, millions of people back to middle class status, or should I say to the new middle class status, are all of these linked to his policies, or would somebody else come along that's pro-growth, pro-business, done things in a whole different way, but still all of the organic, demographic, productivity, everything else would have just been pretty much the same? Is there an alpha to this president, in your opinion?
There is huge alpha. I mean, this is a Trump economy, and I think that there's a lot of naysayers. A lot of people want to go back in time and say, oh, the seeds were planted under Obama and blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to say that's bullshit, okay? He definitely is enjoying some structural change, but if you really go back and you really start with where we were before Trump and before the election and after the election, that's where you got to go. Yes, there are some things that he's benefiting from, but he has single-handedly been a cheerleader and a main driver for what's going on. So let's start with, go back in time, September 2016. October's coming around. The election's on the horizon. We've got earnings season upon us. I sat there and I listened to probably about 100 earnings calls. That's not an exaggeration. Everyone at that time, the CEOs and CFOs, were standing here saying, we are preparing for a recession. If the current trajectory continues, we have no other option but to start layoffs come January 2017. That was what was going on. If you look at the economy in 2016, it was collapsing. We were about to see GDP less than 1% consistently. It was collapsing. Okay? What happens? Well, one thing that happens that's outside of Trump's control was China came back online. China had been hitting the brakes a little bit because, again, they're a mountain of debt. And the Central Bank of China, the PBOC, was trying to control that. The bottom line, outside of the U.S., China had tapped the brakes. Come to this period, China was hitting the gas a little bit. So that created some demand. But you had lack of confidence. You had a belief, a strong belief that it was going to be a Hillary Clinton, and you had every major company executive basically saying, if she's elected, game over, recession. We have no confidence in Hillary as a leader. She will be anti-business. She will continue with the platforms of Obama, which were and are somewhat anti-business. Remember, Obama said, manufacturing's gone, coal business, gone, accept it, move on. Trump then comes in, and let me explain one thing that happens. You then fast forward to the January earnings season. The exact opposite is happening from a few months prior. In just a few months, every single call, the CEOs and CFOs are saying, it's basically, I like the cut of this guy's jib. I like what he's saying. And I'm going to wait. I don't know what to do here, but I like what he's saying. So what you have is a major reversal in confidence. You have every business leader saying, you know what? If this guy follows through on what he's saying, we're going to get to what does that mean, follows through. But we can invest. We will now spend more, hire more on the basis of the potential growth that a Trump is saying he's going to bring. By God, that is huge. First off, you've got confidence. If you look at consumer confidence today, it's huge. If you look at business confidence, it's huge. Never was big for Obama because Obama really didn't get business. Under Trump, though, you've got also some very clear actions that he has been taking. So where under the Obama administration, we see nice, hey, China, please don't. Hey, China, please don't. Under Trump, it's, no, we're not playing games anymore. We're done. Now, is that good or bad for business? Again, it's mixed depending on where you stand. But at the end of the day, the message is, I'm for U.S. business. Then you get to the real hard stuff like the USMC. So if you really look at this trade deal, and this trade deal that is signed between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico is so pro-worker and pro-U.S. business, it's not funny. There's just mandate after mandate within this agreement that he's trying to drive stipulates you can no longer just basically use Mexico as a backdoor to getting your goods into the U.S. cheaper. You have to start manufacturing. It's not just a drop ship and then move it across the border. And it shifts a lot of employment back to the U.S. by basically raising the bar and saying, we're no longer just going to let you be an assembly destination. You actually have to produce there, and you're going to produce under certain conditions. And as a result of these conditions, you're seeing more manufacturing coming back to the U.S. Basically, it's offshoring. If you remember also in his first year, how many people did he beat up? The CEO of GM, Whirlpool. Every single time one of these CEOs said, I'm going to offshore some of my production, Trump was front and center saying, no, you're not. And then we've got all these sanctions and trade barriers being put up. Basically, what you have is a consistent message through both action and words from Trump saying, I want business, I want production and manufacturing here. And then you've got other tax rules and you've got other things that he's been driving, and he's been going to our trade partners and saying, enough, you're not going to do the following things anymore. Now, people don't like his approach. They don't like the way he says things, but I don't really care. I like what he's doing. His impact on this economy is very clear. His fingerprints are all over why we've got growth today. Now, he's also benefiting from things such as fracking, which gives us a lot of oil independence. He didn't create that. But he also didn't come in and, like a Bernie Sanders, say, you know what, I'm going to tax the hell out of the fossil fuel industry. You put that in place, that's seismic. That's a huge difference in the economy. I believe that what we're dealing with right now is the difference between a career politician, and that's really what has been thrown up. When you start with the Clintons and you go to Obama, you don't have anyone who's really had to do business and understands what it really takes and understands. I think it's a big shift. We have to make stuff. This gets back to my concern about interest rates. Interest rates benefiting the housing industry, gee, that's great. All of a sudden, your granite counters and the producers of granite counters and cabinets doing great. I don't care. That's not long-term that's not going to be something we can export. In other words, that's not something that you can produce and trade. Things like making more cars here, exporting that. Things like our technology advantages and exporting that. And recognizing that intellectual property has a value. One of the core central advantages that the US has is the protection of intellectual property. Think about that. There's a reason why Alibaba came to the US and went public in the US, not in China. And that's because they knew that they could maximize the return in the US stock market. There's a reason why from all across the world, engineers and scientists want to come here and patent whatever it is they're producing and take their companies public here. It's because they'll get maximum value here because we protect intellectual property. We do that, but then under Obama, we were letting that get hollowed out immediately. You make it here and instantly it's stolen by China. Trump, by playing all these various aspects of what makes an economy strong, both you got to make stuff. You actually have to make stuff. It could be software, it could be hardware. Israel's a great example of where making software can help raise the value add and help move you up the quality of life, income. Sorry, I'm kind of babbled there, but you start to realize you have to make stuff, software or hardware, to move forward. Both of those rest on a couple of key fundamental things. You've got to have protection of intellectual property, especially for software. You've got to have the ability to recover your investments easier. This is why, for example, countries like Russia really don't have a long-term capability. Their window of opportunity is short. They depend exclusively on oil to stay alive. Their economy doesn't reward things like inventions. Their economy doesn't reward individual property rights. So as a result, you don't really have a lot of real value add stuff coming out of countries like Russia. China, right now, they're still imitating what Japan did back in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, which is property theft. It's steal intellectual property, be mercantilist, keep your currency low, and somehow become the creditor nation of the world. Once you've caught up, what's next? And what you're seeing with China is they're going to stumble pretty soon because they don't really create things. What they do is they make stuff cheaper, and they do it in a variety of ways. And as you and I talked about earlier, that's probably going to shift as the rest of the world recognizes having all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, doesn't work. I mean, you had mentioned, for example, air conditioners, 80% being made in China. That's nice. How about 80% of antibiotics being made in China at a time when you're seeing a global pandemic? All of a sudden, a lot of countries are going to say, wait, this is a problem here. And this is China. This isn't like something that hit the US or Germany where we can understand information, is helping us understand what's going on. And we know that they've got real strong capabilities of dealing with this. This is China. They've got no capability of dealing with this, and they really don't care. Their people are really more like cannon fodder to the leaders. So when you're talking about the US, you're talking about big shifts in attitude, I think, towards China. And I think you've got a Trump who's raising his hand and saying, he's going to say, I told you so pretty soon. He's going to say, there, now do you understand why we can't be dependent on other countries and we need to be much better at supporting ourselves? For example, I bet you'll have a mandate pretty soon. We need to have more domestic production of antibiotics, things like that. Hey, for health concerns, we want to shift things over here. More generic production of antibiotics, just as an example. You will see Trump writing this pretty hard. Back to the original question, is this a Trump economy? Yeah, because he's focused on it. And when Trump came in, he was very clear about his agenda. And one of the things that I talk to people a lot, and there's a lot of anti-Trump sentiment out there. But when I task them with telling me what he has done versus what he said he was going to do, that's where the conversation shifts. Nobody can argue against the facts that he came in with an agenda and he has just been checking the boxes against that agenda. Are his priorities the priorities we should have? That's a separate question. Is he actually going after his agenda and actually trying to meet what he said he would do? Absolutely. And at the top of his agenda were economic issues. These are kitchen sink issues. What are we going to do with trade? What are we going to do with the dollar? What are we going to do on and on and on with healthcare? How are we going to pay for our future? The guy may not be the most articulate, but when it comes to the economy, he's the most effective we've seen in a real long time. So let's go back to Obama. One last point, if I may. And I hope this doesn't come off as a rant, but I'm tired of people trying to use sentiment rather than facts when they look at what his record really is. Let's look at food stamps. snap. Every other recession, you would see that gentle curve of you'd have an increase in people during a recession going on, needing temporary help. You'd have food stamp benefits go up, and then within about 2 years, it returned back to the pre-recessionary level. Under Obama, that absolutely did not happen. We had more people on food stamps growing every year. I mean, we're talking, the recession ended, and 8 years later, we still have all these people still on food stamps at a time when unemployment was going down as well. It just didn't make sense. Trump comes in and he starts asking some hard questions. And this is interesting, using food stamps as an example. They started to come down. Now, is that because of his policies? Partly. It's also partly because of his stance. He took a hard stance. He came in and he said, look, if people really want to use food stamps to eat, then why are we giving them the money to then spend? Why aren't we just drop shipping? We'll just cut out the middleman. We buy wheat, we buy milk from farmers. Let's just drop ship that in boxes, and we'll give people what they need. We'll give them the rice, the bread, whatever it is that they're supposed to be spending food stamps on. We'll just give it to them, and we will save billions of dollars. And then we can take that savings and apply it somewhere else. Hey, guess what? I can now pay for other programs using the money I've just saved. He was immediately vilified. Oh my God, you're taking food away from people. And that absolutely was not the case. What happened is he had to back off that program. But the message was sent. We're no longer going to reimburse food stamps. We're just not going to. We now need means testing. Why are you getting support for food? And then you start digging in, you find out, well, actually, interestingly enough, most of the money is not being spent on food. It's being spent on candy bars. It's being spent on soft drinks. And then you start to realize why people were up in arms. It's because you're basically saying, hey, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Walmart, almost 20% of the funds were going through Walmart. Guess what? You're looking at billions of dollars less money. So naturally, they picked up the phone and called their lobbyists, and they made it a moral issue when it wasn't a moral issue. But here again, what you've got is someone who came in and said, economically, this makes no sense. Why under Obama are we paying billions and billions and billions of dollars to people who, for whatever reason, claim they can't feed themselves at a time when this economy is booming? We need to stop this. And he has successfully done that. And now you've got billions of dollars. You'll have one end of the political spectrum say, oh my God, poor people, they don't get the food. Well, the fact is they weren't spending it on food. The fact is, if you actually look at this, they were buying Coca-Cola, they were buying candy bars. You don't need to pay for that. And as soon as means testing was put in saying, can you tell us why you're still getting these benefits? As soon as the tests were there, you saw people coming off the rolls. Hey, if you give people free stuff, they're going to take it. Of course. This is a program that needed to be fine-tuned. The evidence was obvious. It was broken. People were staying on food stamps. The government was spending tens of billions of dollars on food stamps needlessly. Take it away, guess what? Suddenly they're not poor, they don't need it. This is a Trump initiative. People don't like these things. We don't want to think in terms of the morality of taking food away. But when you start digging through the facts and you realize, wait, you're not taking food away, you're taking candy bars away. That's different. And I think when you've got a president at the top who's willing to say, no, this makes no sense. You called him an alpha male. I'm going to say that he's dad. Dad has come home and he's not happy. Junior is sitting around watching TV, drinking beer, eating chips, wants the keys to the car. Dad's pissed. Dad says, no, get a job. And people don't like to think at that level of clarity. There's always the corner cases. Oh, but I can't and I can't. You know what? The reality is, that is the reality. Dad is in town. He's come in, he's laying down the law. And I'm sorry, but he's not kissing your boo-boo and saying, I'm sorry you had a hard day and you just don't feel up to it. Go out, cut the grass. If you're done, I'll give you $10. That's your allowance for cutting the grass and weeding the lawn. If you don't do that, why should I just give you $10? Now, I'm sorry, this is like harsh, but it's the reality. We have a system in place in America, in Sweden, in Germany, in most countries of social benefits because people need them. We need to come together as a community, whether it's healthcare, education, food. Not everyone is able to work. Not everyone is able to make ends meet. And we have the ability to help them. But those should be short-term safety nets. Instead, what you're seeing, again, in Germany, Sweden, the US, these are programs that they're not there for temporary purposes. They continue and they grow, and they shouldn't. Some programs should grow. Programs that are safety nets should shrink when the economy is doing well and should grow when the economy is not doing well. This goes back to biblical times. This is the Joseph effect. Joseph comes to the Pharaoh and he says, 7 fat years, 7 lean years. You've got to prepare for the lean years. But it's not a permanent state of affairs. Even Keynes, the economist, understood you're going to spend public money when private money is not available. But it's not a permanent state of affairs. You don't want to compete with the private sector. You're just trying to kind of fill the gaps when the private sector can't step in. Hey, when there are no jobs and people need help, public sector needs to come in. When there are jobs, the public sector needs to step out. Under Obama, what we saw was the public sector not only wasn't stepping out, it was growing. It was bringing in more people because, again, think of this institutionally, Lior. This is key. I come out of a big company. I come out of a place where you were rewarded by being promoted according to how many people worked for you, your span of control. Well, then obviously I'm going to try to build the number of employees I have, whether or not I need them. Whether or not that was good for the company, it's good for me. Programmatically, it's the same thing. If I'm a police department, fire department, whatever, all the way up through the SNAP benefits, if I say I'm helping this many people more than I was last year, I must be doing something good. You know, we always hear the rumors about police forces having quotas. Hey, if I handed out 1,000 tickets last year and 2,000 tickets this year, that means I'm dealing with more crime and I must be effective, so I need more resources. Same thing. What we had was a perversion of purpose with a lot of these programs. What you had was, if I'm helping out more people with food stamps, I must be good. If I'm helping them out with even more food stamps, I must be doing even better. I'm doing more good deeds by helping out more people. And that's not really what you want to be doing with these kind of social benefit programs. They should not stay. They're temporary. Instead, what we found under Obama was they were abused. And then when dad comes in and says, oh my God, what's going on here? That's not what should be going on. People freak out. And the people who freaked out the most, if you really dig in, were the ones who were benefiting the most. I'm not saying everybody who was part of these programs is somehow feeling the benefit in their back pocket. There are a lot of altruistic people who really feel strongly about these programs, and they should, and thank God they're there. But I think if you look at it programmatically, abuse was everywhere. I think in the US right now, you're starting to see a lot of the abuse being attacked. The program should be running. But when you have an open-ended program like we have with healthcare, like we have with food stamps, you're going to see a lot of abuse. And what strikes me as really, really problematic is when someone comes in and says, let's stop the abuse, not stop the program, let's stop the abuse of this. Let's rethink what's the priority here. And they're instantly cut off at the knees. That concerns me. And part of it's also Trump because
100%. No, it's tough love. That's what it is.
I know I'm rambling. It's not tough love. It's just simply saying there's a priority. What is our priorities? And I think Trump came in with priorities and said, these are the priorities as I see them. A lot of them are going to be economic. These social priorities, yeah, whatever. If I could end with one thought, it's this. We're seeing a pattern repeat itself. Go back, you're seeing two patterns, and this is why the Democrats are going to flame out and why that matters to the economy. If you have Trump for 4 more years, this is a huge win for the economy and the stock market. I think that is going to uplift the economy going forward in the US. You're going to see a stock market rage towards the end of the year as it becomes more and more evident that Trump will be running the economy. Go back in time. You got the Vietnam War in the US. Huge expenditure of capital, both political and real capital, moral capital. Same thing with George W. Bush. We're now fighting in not just Afghanistan, but Iraq. You've got just a huge waste of capital everywhere. Well, what that means is the citizens of the United States get unsure. They don't feel as strong. So we elected Jimmy Carter, and we elected Barack Obama. Why? Because both of them now cater to the moral side of the US. We've gone out, we've killed a lot of people needlessly. We've created a lot of discord around the world. We're questioning our actions, and quite frankly, we're also somewhat poor. After a couple of years, though, you have people starting to swing the other way. That period of self-doubt ends. So you get a Reagan and a Trump thrown up. They are men of their times. Essentially, instead of playing soft, the US elects someone who's going to play hard. And during both periods, what you witness are real geopolitics. The rest of the world doesn't play our game. They don't buy into a lot of the way the US operates, where we have social causes dominating politics. The rest of the world doesn't do that. The rest of the world is much more focused on kitchen basics, kitchen table basics. So Russia, Iran, not coincidentally, back in the 80s, before Reagan comes in, and today, before Trump comes in, seeing that there's a window of opportunity, seeing that there are things and actions that they can take that will benefit them in the short term before an America comes back online. What that means is you've got everything from go back in time to Russia taking Afghanistan. Today, Russia taking Crimea. This extension, because they recognize the U.S. can't do anything. The U.S. no longer wants to go to another war. That window of opportunity then closes. You have a guy like Reagan, you have a guy like Trump getting elected, and they say the same things. Hey, wait a second. You've got Trump saying, make America great again. You've got Reagan saying, morning in America. Point is, you've got them saying, wait a second, we've been kind of taken advantage of in different ways in different places. We don't like that anymore. We're going to start pushing back. The exact same accusations of Trump were made to Reagan. They're, unpredictable, stupid, dangerous, anti-Semitic, anti-African-American, racist, bringing us closer to doomsday. I mean, on and on and on. It's one-to-one, same patterns repeating. And what's interesting is the successes that they achieved in terms of relationships, in terms of foreign relationships. Interesting anecdote was Reagan goes to negotiate with the Soviet Union. The State Department basically says, whatever they say, you got to do. In the room, Reagan's talking, negotiating, and he's just fed up with what he's hearing, and he gets up and he leaves. The State Department, the experts, oh, you can't do it. You've ruined everything. Reagan said, they're not here to negotiate. I'm not here to just do what they want. I'm out. You've got someone at the top pushing back against the so-called experts who know better. You've got accusations of Reagan just destroying international relationships, and yet you fast forward, he was absolutely right. I believe Trump is given the exact same cards that Reagan was given, which is a mandate to change a lot of the foreign relations, a mandate to change a lot of the way the U.S. was structured. And I think Trump, like Reagan, is following through with that. And that created under Reagan a strong economy. It's creating under Trump a strong economy. If you get Trump reelected for 4 years, man, you're going to see an even stronger economy, because now you're going to see the infrastructure play he wants to put out. I'm a big fan of his economic policies. I'm a big fan of his foreign policies. I know people like to think Trump is unpredictable and dangerous. I think they're missing the boat. If you look at the recent actions he's taken around the world, his whole point is unpredictability. His whole point is making the other side rethink everything and change the trajectory of how they're behaving. Taking Soleimani off the stage forced Iran to suddenly pull back and realize this is no longer Obama tit for tat, or we can do what we want. All of a sudden, they now have to recalibrate. Now, was it a deliberate action fully calculated by Trump? Doesn't matter. Iran doesn't know if this guy's, batshit crazy or not. They now have to act more cautiously, and that's hugely effective. Instead of sending troops in, they took out one guy. That plus the economic sanctions are working. Trump is a guy who takes that same view with the economy, but he's got one more thing that he can do. Reagan was an actor. Trump is a performer as well. Remember, go back in time. Trump was doing hucksterism all day long, beauty contests, casinos. He was part of the, the USFL, the Football League? Here's a guy who understands how to get an audience excited and on board. He knows how to play that game, and that is consumer confidence. That's the basis of consumer confidence. Getting people excited, positive, and into what's happening today. That is very compelling. That's part of being that alpha male, is getting people to say, yeah, wherever you go, I will follow. And if he actually is more successful than not, that's a great win. People will tell me Trump's an idiot. And I say, yeah, but if he's an idiot, what does that say about the rest of Washington, D.C.? Because he's so effective at getting things done that he wants to get done. If he's an idiot, that makes me very concerned about the rest of Washington, D.C. They must be dumb.
Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you.